We are part of a symbiotic relationship with something that disguises itself as an extraterrestrial invasion so as not to alarm us. Terence McKenna, author, Psychonaut. Experience 6. Sister Earth and a shot to the pineal gland. October 11th, 2021. Unknown to 6:46 a.m. Sometime last night, I was dreaming about being outside with a group of U.S. military men and a woman with strong psychic abilities that they had hired to help with some catastrophic event. We were all silently standing in an outdoor structure, staring up at the night sky through a large square opening in the ceiling. Nothing was said, but I got the sense that we were all waiting for something to appear in the sky. Eventually, a stealth bomber-looking aircraft dropped down very close, and I remember being instantly startled by the sheer size and power of it. Somehow, I knew that these military men had ordered the planes to investigate and/or attack nearby ET craft. After some time had passed, I suddenly got a vision of the Greys inside one of the ships. I was inside one of their minds, and it focused on the psychic woman and began speaking through her. So she's essentially channeling this gray being, and she says, "We are not here to harm you, but we will defend ourselves if you do not stand down." These were not her exact words. In fact, there was a lot more to it. That's just the gist of what I can remember. After this happened, the scene changed in an instant, and I found myself walking around a large, bright white atrium in which there were holograms arranged in a large circle. These holograms represented various structures on Earth, famous buildings and events in history. They had a sort of translucent and pearlescent quality and were rotating slowly in place. There were a lot of people walking around this place. I got the sense that they were all men, women, and children, although I don't remember actually seeing any children. I just remember that it felt like a public place, like a futuristic museum. The entire time I was walking alongside two very tall, high-ranking military men to my left. They were ushering me towards a room full of people, which had a very wide, open entrance. Inside this room, the people were sitting on stools of some kind, which reminded me of the seating they have at the Apple Store when you're waiting for assistance. It was just like that. The people sitting in these chairs were ex-presidents and other high-profile people. I remember specifically seeing George W. Bush there. When I walked into the room, everyone looked at me as if they all recognized me. There was a woman who was leading a discussion or seminar of some kind, who paused her presentation to greet me. She said something like, "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Or, "What brings you to this room?" I laughed and said, "I don't really know." Somehow I knew that these people in this room were being educated about ETs, and I was recognized as some sort of expert on the subject. And while it was unusual for me to be there, my presence was apparently a pleasant surprise to them. I was standing up in front of them, answering questions for a prolonged period of time, which passed in an instant. In other words, I didn't live through all of the moments. I was just being made aware that it happened. During this little Q&A, a few government men were looking up at me, asking about the Greys, or maybe ETs in general. The first question I remember was, "Is their eyesight just as good as ours?" To which I replied, "Yes." They asked, "Are their bodies as fragile as ours?" To which I replied, "Yes." I got the sense that they were trying to suss out their vulnerabilities more than they were genuinely curious about the beings themselves. This made me uncomfortable, because I was there to share information, not help them strategize about how to defeat their perceived enemy. I continued to say, "Although their bodies are fragile, they are thousands of years more advanced than we are, technologically speaking, and it would be pointless to attack them. It would be like a mouse trying to hunt and kill a cat." and their eyes got big, and they didn't know what to say. I wasn't trying to shut them down necessarily, but I wanted them to understand that they were coming at this all wrong and should work on seeing things differently. Seconds later, I started waking up and immediately heard a ringing in my right ear. At first, I was a little afraid that this might be Sal the Eben coming to strangle me again, so I resisted and said no, no, no. But after a few minutes, I decided to let go of my fear and just go with it. My curiosity was too great. Once I was able to let go of the fear, I started to feel some kind of vacuum-like energy lock on to my entire body. I could feel that it was coming from above me. This is the first time I've felt anything like this, but I assume it happens every time and I just don't notice it. I could feel the energy getting increasingly stronger and pulling me upward. As it did this, I was simultaneously slipping into an altered state, and this happened very fast. This altered state was accompanied by a shift in my perception of time and an increased ability to focus, much like a psychedelic experience. At this point, I thought I knew what was about to happen. I was going to start floating upward like all the other times, but something else happened this time. For whatever reason, I had the wherewithal to keep my eyes open, and I never lost consciousness after the ear ringing like I normally would. That was a first. In the moment, I was under the impression that this was something I was in control of, and I thought to myself, I want to see what happens. Of course, now I'm not sure if I had anything to do with it. I've come to realize that whatever I see is usually what they want me to see. As I floated upwards towards the ceiling, I got so close that I could see all the detail of the texture of the paint, and just as it seemed like my face was going to squish up against it, I passed right through like a ghost, and continued going upward through the wood and all the inner material of the house. I reached the attic, which was pitch black. Then I passed through the roof, and I saw the night sky and the stars. I continued floating upward, getting higher and higher. So high. And I thought about how, if I fell from this height, I would surely die. And I think this was because it didn't feel like an out-of-body experience. It just felt like I was there, vulnerable to gravity and the rest of the elements. It didn't occur to me that if something seemingly dangerous happened, that I'd just wake up back in my bed safe and sound. But as with all the other experiences, I wasn't afraid. It seems that my ability to feel fear is always somehow shut down once I enter this altered state. I was enchanted and spellbound by the wondrous view, and it was so beautiful and unreal that I just surrendered to the whole trip. It kept taking me higher and higher, until at a certain point, my entire body began slowly rotating, so that I was now looking down to the earth, with my back facing up. I wasn't high up enough to see the entire planet, but I could see the lights of houses and the kinds of things you'd see from an airplane window. The entire time this was happening, I got the sense that they were taking me somewhere very specific, not just a joyride through the cosmos. The whole thing seemed to be moving me at the same steady pace, like the It's a Small World ride at Disneyland. No scary upside-down loops, no change in velocity, nothing jarring, just a nice, safe, steady pace taking me somewhere, and I trusted in that. And even though I was floating miles and miles up into the sky, with my body completely untethered and my trajectory seemingly unguided, I knew on some level that I was safely in the hands of some omnipresent intelligence, separate from my own, and they handled me with the utmost care. The next thing that happened is difficult to describe, because I don't really have a precedent for it. As I floated upward, I saw large entities waving their appendages around in space, ghostly beings with no recognizable features, no technology, just some ethereal wildlife of this region of space, or something bizarre like that. They were giants, godlike entities. I don't remember them communicating anything to me, and I certainly didn't think to say anything either. I got the feeling I should just observe. Moments later, I became disoriented as I felt myself descending down onto an Earth-like planet. I flew close to the ground like a superhero, but much slower, and not of my own volition. I was still being guided by whatever or whomever was controlling me. I was being shown this other Earth, and there was a voice in my head, or a knowing that awakened inside of me, which began telling me a story of the last days of this planet. They said something to me like, Earth used to have a sister planet, but it was destroyed by the inhabitants. They didn't want our help and turned us away. We had to allow them to do what they thought was right, even though we did not agree. I saw people walking through the streets, human beings indistinguishable from those on our planet. I saw storefronts which looked exactly like 7-Elevens with a different name in different languages, and other such supermarket-type logos and branding, yet they were all completely unrecognizable to me. It was like nothing we have here on Earth. The closest thing I could compare it to is that feeling you might get when you visit a foreign country, and you see that they have all the same stuff, like advertisements, cars, plants, animals, etc., but everything is just a little different. There's a strange feeling of familiarity and alienation. After flying around the urban environment, I reached an ocean or a bay on the edge of the city, with small saucer-shaped crafts floating or hovering just above the water. I saw a small group of gray aliens standing up inside their respective ships, as if they were taking one last look around at the state of things just before leaving for good. They were all asked to leave, and as a result, the planet was destroyed. From what I observed, it was obvious that they left reluctantly. They had told me as much. But they were following some sort of higher code of ethics, like Star Trek's Prime Directive, and were forced to abandon the planet and its inhabitants. I didn't see the planet get destroyed. I was only told that this is what happened through some wordless transference of information. Once they finished showing me this story, which very well could have been some sort of immersive holographic movie, I lost consciousness and woke up back in my bed, in my room, in our house, but still in this altered state. As soon as I opened my eyes and looked up, I saw the long, pale, white arm of a being as tall as the ceiling, slowly opening my bedroom door. He leaned in as he opened the door, like a loved one would do to usher you down the hall for supper or something like that, not fully entering the room, but opening the door to let you out. His face was very human-like, but he had a very different bone structure, unlike anything I've ever seen. His jawbones were square, with small incremental nubs sticking out, which increased in size slightly as they extended from the base of the jaw to the chin region. He also had similar protrusions on his shoulders, arms, and other parts of his body. He was not wearing any clothing, and I don't remember seeing any reproductive organs either, but I didn't have long to analyze him. Once I realized he wanted me to go with him, I got out of bed and just sort of went with it. For some reason, I trusted him. He seemed like a friendly monster. As I got close to him, I looked up and said, "Whoa, you look cool." And he just smiled as if to acknowledge that he understood that he looked strange to me. He walked towards Vanessa's bedroom, to the left of my room, and opened the door. I followed him in, and there was some sort of female nurse or doctor in the back left corner of the room working on someone else. I wasn't able to see who the other person was or any details about them. I don't think our furniture was in there, and I don't think Vanessa was in there either. This didn't really alarm me, though, because although this looked identical to our house, I knew that Vanessa was safe and sound, sleeping in her bed, back in the same version of our house where my body was also sleeping. This was perhaps the same alternate dimension I had visited before, in Experience 1, where I saw the Pleiadian woman and her child resting on Vanessa's bed. The same dark orange hue illuminated the entire space. Once I entered the room, the giant man said to me, "You'll need to wear a helmet for this." And I turned around and someone put a piece of tissue paper on my head, followed by a white helmet. It looked like something the rebel fighter pilots wore from the old Star Wars movies, but there were no markings on it that I can remember, just a plain white helmet. So once they put that on me, I turned back around and walked towards the giant man. At this point, I got the idea to look down at my hands and feet to just make sure that this was all real, and maybe just to focus on something to remember for later. As a result of doing this, I noticed that I was completely nude, which isn't the first time I've been without clothing during these nightly escapades. There is either a blank in my memory or I lost consciousness, because the next thing I knew, I was back in my bed. As I laid there, I remember having a brief vision of a pretty South Asian-looking woman, whom I believe was the same nurse or doctor I'd seen earlier in Vanessa's bedroom. But the image of her that popped into my mind was a close-up of her face, not a memory of when I saw her before. I think she was wearing makeup and a white lab coat. I suppose she could have been a scientist just as much as a doctor. I'm unsure whether this vision of her was a memory coming through or a telepathic projection. Who's to say? After the vision of the woman, which only lasted a second, I was immediately approached by a handsome South Asian-looking man leaning over me. He looked about my age, with short dark hair, similar ethnicity to the female doctor, I thought, but with much lighter skin. He was wearing a lab coat and maybe something blue underneath, with something around his neck, but I couldn't say what it was. I don't think it was a stethoscope. Shortly after he entered the room, I noticed that my bedroom door was still wide open, and I think I remember seeing some sort of light in the hallway. While I was looking over at that, the man had been preparing a very large syringe, and somehow I knew he was going to administer an injection into my forehead. Maybe they had told me that earlier and I just forgot. Or it could have been a psychic read. The needle was very long, maybe about 8 inches. I asked him telepathically, "Is this going to hurt?" And he responded, yeah. Then I said, "Then why are you letting me remember this?" A strange thing to say, to be sure. I knew that they usually blank my memory or disallow me from being conscious for certain things, either to protect me or for other reasons. So I didn't understand why they deliberately allow me to be conscious for this, since it was going to hurt. So even though I said, "Why are you letting me remember this?" what I meant was, "Why aren't you blacking me out for this?" I can't remember if he responded telepathically or with his voice, but after he told me it was going to hurt, he began inserting the needle into my forehead, at exactly the area of the third eye, aka the pineal gland, and I felt it slowly going in, except I didn't actually feel any pain. I just felt the kind of gross feeling of having something penetrate my skull and brain. The needle must have been made out of diamond because it went through my skull like butter. This confused me too because I didn't understand why he said it was going to hurt if it didn't actually end up hurting. In retrospect, I can see that they wanted me to remember this for some reason. Clearly they blocked out the pain, but not the memory. It's difficult to make sense out of it. Once the shot was administered, I immediately lost consciousness and abruptly woke up in bed. The haziness of the other reality swiftly dissipated and transitioned into the clear and crisp stillness of being awake in our dimension. After the feeling of shifting instantly from being intoxicated to stone-cold sober in seconds, I thought, "Whoa, incredible." It's always a rush when I come back and realize what just happened. It doesn't matter if it was a pleasurable or highly traumatic experience. The feeling of the otherworldly is always exhilarating. I looked at my phone, as I often do afterwards, and it was 6:46 a.m. I don't know when it all began, but it must have been several hours, if, when I left my body, the stars were out, and upon waking it was daylight. But that's assuming that time works the same way over there. Later that day, Vanessa and I had an appointment to see the doctor about the progress of the baby, who is now my son Luke. And on the way home, we stopped by CVS to get me a flu shot. I think I was the only one in our household who hadn't gotten one yet. I can't remember if this was something we had scheduled or if it just occurred to us in the moment. But I find it strange that after having had that experience with the young doctor and his extremely long syringe, that I was also getting an injection in this reality too. I have to wonder if those things are somehow connected. That night I slept horribly, tossing and turning with fever and chills so aggressive that I was having muscle spasms all over. I was in and out of sleep, but at some point in the night, I had a profound dream that I was sleeping on the floor in my childhood home in Stone Mountain, in Victoria's bedroom. Oddly enough, she was sleeping in my old room. I didn't find this out until later, however, but the fact that we swapped rooms seemed significant. While I was sleeping in her room, I heard a strong ringing in my left ear, the side of the head that Ra says is associated with contact by negative entities. So I began saying, as Lainey and Victoria have instructed me to say, "Are you from the light?" And every time I asked that, the ringing would cease. It happened about 3 times until I finally got up off the floor and left the room. I was tired of their attempts to engage with me. This had all of the qualities of a normal dream state, yet many of the times I've been visited have been in this state, or just coming out of one. So I have to wonder if these entities knew that I was weak and decided to attack. I also have to wonder if it was the flu shot that made me feel so horrible, or whatever the young doctor injected into my pineal gland. From a certain grounded perspective, it would seem obvious that it was caused by the flu shot, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not all that simple. I'll probably never get an answer to that. But regardless, let's just say I'm not looking forward to getting another injection anytime soon. Afterthoughts. A little less than 2 years later, I got the urge to start reading more about people who've had these types of experiences, and that led me to a masterful work by authors and experiencers Brad and Francie Steger, entitled The Star People, a book I referenced in an earlier chapter. This book was the first of its kind, as far as I know, compiling stories from people back in the early 80s and before, who had had similar experiences to mine, who also felt as though they were not from Earth. This book seems to be the origin of the New Age concept of starseeds, and in my view, is essential reading for anyone on this path. I came across a section of the book in which one of the experiencers refers to being made aware of a, quote, twin Earth during their contacts with ETs and or UFOs. This completely blew my mind. I'd been waiting for this moment ever since the first encounter, to know that others out there are not only having these experiences, but that they are also being given the same or similar information. In the moment that I discovered this passage, reflecting on what I'd been shown during the Sister Earth experience, this was huge. It was a powerful affirmation, if I still had any doubts about the validity of these experiences, that there is definitely something going on, and we are absolutely being communicated with. Here's the excerpt from the book. Like so many star people, Suzanne M. of North Carolina has had many dreams of UFOs. When she was 5, she remembers having a frequent dream of something looking down at her from the sky. The white oval light fixture on the ceiling used to cause her discomfort. Around the age of 11, she dreamed repeatedly of UFOs landing in their yard. In her waking state, she used to fantasize about traveling to a twin Earth. These kinds of connections are what makes this contact work so irresistible. I can't let it go, hard as I may try. Something is reaching out to me, showing me things from the past of a completely different planet. Could it be connected to the dream about the historical holograms in the futuristic museum? In both narratives, the Greys were benevolent voices of reason, trying to help, but ultimately pushed away by militaristic authority and the self-destructive patterns that the inhabitants of the Sister Earth could not break. Maybe the dream where I was teaching world leaders about ETs was some sort of parallel universe in which I have a way cooler job than in this one. The shot to my pineal gland, which seemed to initiate my coming out of the whole experience, reminded me of when Amiko gave me the serum in Experience 1, which also immediately caused me to come back. Other times I come back for no discernible reason or from no obvious cause, which further underscores that I still don't know how any of this works. Sometimes that's hard to live with, and other times it's fine. I'm just along for the ride, out of curiosity and fascination, wherever it leads.